Hi everybody. I just wanted to give you just a little bit more instruction on the My Turn essay based on the problems that I saw with the rhetorical analysis. Um, so I'm going to walk through the assignment sheet and highlight the things that you need to be paying attention to. And this reading of the assignment sheet is one of the skills that you need to develop at the college level. Um, Generally, my assignment sheets will be very clear about what I am expecting in the essay, what the different components of the essay are, and what I'm going to grade the essay based on. Most college professors will provide you with that information if they don't ask for it. But reading the assignment sheet is the first task in doing the assignment, and you should spend some time making sure that you understand what's being expected of you so that you don't head off in a wrong direction or get a bad grade on the professional draft and then have to spend even more time revising to bring your grade up. Okay, so I'm going to highlight some of the things that you should pay attention to. And one of the most important features of any assignment sheet that you get in college is the verbs that are used. They are going to tell you what your task is. Okay, so you see at the top here that I've listed several things that constitute the purpose in me assigning this essay to you. We've done two types of rhetorical analysis, the visual analysis and the analysis of an argument, a speech or a written argument. And now you're going to incorporate those analysis skills with making your own argument. Okay? So the first thing you have to do to fulfill the purpose of this assignment is to understand and explain the argument that's being made in the essay that you have chosen. Okay? And that generally is going to take you several readings, as the PowerPoint presentation on critical reading and annotating the text and all of that told you. Okay? So don't expect that you're going to grasp the argument on the first reading or first viewing, and several of the arguments that you have chosen are complex arguments. They're not simple arguments. So it's important that you pick up on things, not only what they say, but how they say it, in other words, the tone. So understanding and explaining the writer's argument, which hopefully you're better at this point after having done the last assignment, is your first step. The second step, and the thrust of the argument, that's why it's called My Turn Essay, is to respond to the argument by, it says here, announcing and developing a position of your own. That announcing a position of your own means that you need to create a thesis statement that clearly tells the reader what your position is on whatever the topic is in the essay that you've chosen. You also have to demonstrate effective essay organization and paragraph organization. And in essay organization, obviously, there are several components to a well-organized essay. A solid intro that leads the reader naturally to the body, a solid conclusion that wraps everything up at the end, and a body that is sequenced in a way that builds your argument in the most effective way. Sometimes that's starting with your strongest point and finishing with one of your weaker points, though I don't advise that you use weak reasons or evidence in your essay, but there are sometimes more convincing points for a particular audience than others. There are certainly many, many writers who will focus on one good reason that's complex and detail that reasoning in the body of their essay. And so however you make your argument, what reasons you provide and what evidence you provide, you need to organize it well so that it's easy for the reader to follow your logic. Another component of strong organization and a structure that really keeps the reader on track throughout the paper are transitions, of course. And that means between paragraphs, you can't just change topics. You need to transition from one idea to another. Sometimes you'll have multiple paragraphs on one topic, but when you're changing topics, it's really important that you have a strong transition. The next thing that you have to make sure that you do is provide support for whatever this argument is that you're going to make that's based on the essay or the speech that you listen to. Okay? And obviously all of this is meant to build on the rhetorical skills that your previous two papers have been introducing you to and giving you practice at. Now, there's a little twist on audience and genre in this assignment. The audience for this essay is the same audience that the original argument had. So you can see here that I have listed all of the choices that you had for these essays and where those came from. So obviously you will need to, for instance, if you chose Austin's article, you would need to look up, research the information about who the audience of the U.S. News and World Report is. Same thing with all of these other sources where these essays came from, okay? And then you will write to that audience. Make sure you understand the characteristics of that audience, how educated they are, perhaps what their economic status is, what their ethnic background is, or race, if you think that matters. Make sure you do a thorough audience analysis. One of the things that I saw missing in several people's visual analysis as well as their evaluative rhetorical analysis was an analysis of the audience. And when you're dealing with analyzing rhetoric, audience is one of the most important components, right? And you should see that if you just think about how you speak to the different groups of people that you deal with in your life, right? You are talking to your boss, you're going to use a particular tone, perhaps a different word choice. The rhetorical situation, meaning the audience that you're talking to, is going to dictate how you talk and what you say and how you say it. Same thing goes for if you're with your friends, right? It would be a very different rhetorical situation. So focusing on that audience is really, really important. You cannot become skilled at rhetorical analysis unless you understand the role that audience plays, okay? This isn't simply you writing what you want to write. This is writing it towards a particular audience and being very conscientious about how you appeal to that audience, the examples you use, the word choice, the level of formality, the tone of the piece. All of those things need to be taken into consideration. They need to be conscious choices. Okay, so it's not a matter of just sitting down and writing your draft. It's about making rhetorical choices and writing an essay that demonstrates to me that you know what your choices are and you know how to respond to that rhetorical situation. Okay, so I've done part of the work for you by telling you where these pieces were originally published. You are going to have to do the research on who the audience for those publications will be. All right, and again, so you will write your essay to the same audience that the original essay was written to. Genre, in this essay, same thing. You want to write your paper in the same genre that the original essay was written in. So, for instance, Brent Staples' What Adolescents Miss When We Let Them Grow Up in Cyberspace was a newspaper article that was published in the New York Times. New York Times tends to be a liberal audience. It's a newspaper article, so it has some length and depth to it. Okay? Whereas Kingsolver's piece, Stone Soup, is an essay in a collection of essays that was written by her. And generally in an essay collection, the author may sometimes write in a narrative style. Stone Soup is certainly written in a narrative style. It's a reflective piece, but it also has an argumentative point to it. Okay, so you're writing with the same audience and in the same genre that the essay you've chosen was written in. Okay, so the next thing that you need to look at are these instructions at the bottom of this instruction paragraph. Okay, if you notice, I say what I want you to do in several different ways throughout this assignment sheet, but here what I tell you is that I want you to demonstrate that you thoroughly understand one of the essays that we're reading. Okay, and you have to respond to that essay by articulating your own clear, thoughtful, and persuasive argument about the topic. Okay? So those are the two major components that your grade's going to rest upon in this assignment. Understanding, first of all, the argument that you're reading. You don't want to oversimplify it. You want to be able to identify the claims and the reasons and the evidence for the argument that you're reading. And you want to make sure that you get that right before you can possibly respond to the argument. Okay? So as I've said before, as I said in the PowerPoint for the rhetorical analysis, paper 3, claims, reason, and evidence are the backbone of any argument. So you've got to make sure that you identify those elements. And then you will formulate your own argument about that topic. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily, for instance, Koch writes about the death penalty. You could easily, or you could choose to write a paper that argues your stance on the death penalty, making your own argument. It is not enough to summarize his argument. It's not enough to duplicate his argument in different words using different sources. You have to formulate your own argument about the topic. So you could do it on the death penalty, whether you think it should be abolished or not, or you might take, for instance, one of Koch's points. For instance, that he makes the point that the death penalty is not hypocritical, that killing someone for killing someone is not hypocritical. You could write easily a 5 to 6 page essay just arguing that point, or you could argue his point that it deters crime. Okay, so there are multiple places in each of these arguments where you could dig deeper and expose something new in that argument. Okay, or you can just take on the general topic. It's up to you. But either way, the two components, as it says here in the assignment sheet, are to demonstrate that you understand that argument fully, careful, critical reading, and then you have to make your own argument, which means that you're bound to that same list of criteria for effective argument as the people that you were analyzing in paper 3 are. So you've got to have a clear claim. You have to have logical, valid reasons. You have to have valid evidence to back those up. You want to use the rhetorical appeals that would be most effective. Pathos, ethos, and logos. You want to make sure that you're speaking appropriately for the audience that you're talking to. You want to make sure that you build your credibility. All of those components of effective argument that we've been studying are going to be necessary elements in your argument. So make sure that you keep that in mind. And you might review that list of criteria. You might go back through that PowerPoint on analyzing an argument. Okay. Now, another important part of this is right here, and that is that you are writing this not to duplicate the argument, not to simply repeat what the other person says in your own words, but to say something new. Okay? If I just wanted you to make the same argument in your own words, this would all be a fruitless exercise. All right? The argument that you're reading that you chose to use as the basis for this paper is a launching pad. It's a springboard. Okay, there are many ways that you could use these essays as a basis for another essay, and one of the reasons that we're doing this whole exercise is so that you understand that no argument exists in a vacuum. It's always within some sort of context that an argument is made. All right, so any piece of argument, any text, is already involved in a conversation about that topic. And what you want to do is add your voice to that conversation. And you don't want to simply add it by saying the same thing that's already been said in the essay that you read. Okay, so you have to say something new. You've got to find a different angle, a different approach than the one that's taken by the author of the essay that you read. Okay, so that's another important part of this assignment sheet. All right, so obviously you have to research the topic and write your own argument about it. Okay, that involves research. You have a minimum of 4 sources for this paper, and they should be scholarly sources. I always recommend that you start with the DSC Libraries database. There's a link to that on the front page of our class page in Falcon Online. I always recommend that you start there because the sources in our library have been peer-reviewed, meaning that other people who are also experts have looked at the articles to make sure they don't contain huge errors in fact, or that they are appropriate for the audience of whatever publication is reviewing them. So that's the best place to start. Now, it's perfectly okay to use websites that are reliable and valid. How do you know if they're reliable or valid? Well, for one thing, there's a handout. There always is. On the content page that's called Evaluating Online Sources. It gives you a step-by-step process for looking for signs that a web page may not be reliable. Wikipedia is not okay, but I will tell you that one feature of Wikipedia that can be really helpful in a research project like this is the bibliography that's found at the end of most Wikipedia articles, because the reason we don't let you use Wikipedia is not because everything on Wikipedia is wrong. That's not the case. It's because it's not reviewed as carefully as, say, the sources in our library are, and people can change it very easily. Okay, it's an open source, and that means that anybody can contribute to it, anybody can write articles for it. That doesn't mean it's not reviewed at all. Wikipedia's review process is not anything. Not everything gets posted. However, you don't know what stage the article you're reading is in. You don't know how carefully it's been reviewed. But if you go down to the well-written articles, especially the ones that really are based on solid research, will have a bibliography at the bottom, and those sources a lot of times, 70% of the time, are reliable sources. So use those sources. Go to the sources that Wikipedia is using. Do not use Wikipedia as a source. Okay, so you have to research this topic, and let me caution you that nobody can be informed on a topic before they do their research. So unless you are already someone who has done research on the topic of the essay that you chose, then you need to do your research first before you come up with a thesis statement. I know all of you have probably been in classes where the first step in a research paper was for you to announce your thesis. I strongly disagree with that practice because what it says is that you can come up with a thesis statement before you've actually thoroughly researched the topic. And that's not what I want you to do. I want you to do the research, and based on that research, you formulate an argument about the topic. Otherwise, if you start with a thesis statement, all you're going to do is research to back up your argument instead of reading about the topic open-mindedly and with an open frame of mind. okay? You will have already closed down to your view of the topic and will be less likely to entertain any other views. And one surefire way to shut down critical thinking is to do that. Okay, so entertaining other perspectives, trying to see things from other viewpoints is a cornerstone of critical thinking. So don't come up with your thesis before you do your research. Do your research and then formulate a thesis that you want to argue in your paper. Okay? Now, another part that is important, right? Anytime a teacher bolds things, you should pay attention to them. They do it for a reason. Okay? So this again tells you what your primary task is. Your task in this essay is to take a particular side on your issue. So you can't be wishy-washy. You can't say, well, maybe this is true. You want to make a solid claim. So you need to find one that you can make with conviction. All right? There's no presenting both sides of the arguments and saying, oh, well, one side has a point and the other side has a point. That's not making an argument or making a case for a particular side or position on the issue that you're reading about, okay? Don't forget that your goal is to persuade your reader. That is always the goal of argumentative writing. And I say again here, though you must acknowledge the other author's position, your primary goal in this essay is to establish a compelling position of your own. So you need to set up at the beginning of the paper the idea that you are responding to someone else's argument. And I don't mean by saying, well, I read this article and this happened, or I read this article and I disagree. Okay? You want to be a little more rhetorically sophisticated than that. But you have to acknowledge to your reader what has prompted you to write this essay. Just like you would need to know in any rhetorical situation, in any essay that you encounter, you want to know what caused the person to write it. Okay, what was their purpose? And your purpose should be clear. So you're going to have to acknowledge the other author's position. That's the understanding the other person's argument. But you are making a separate, compelling argument of your own. Okay, that is the primary goal. All right? This essay, let's see, the research requirements I've already said, that you have to have at least 4 sources. And again, you are bound by that same list of criteria for effective argument that all of the writers that we have been examining have to account for. All right? Don't forget about using the rhetorical appeals that you've learned. Okay? When you make an argument, you want to use the most effective rhetorical appeals you can. Now, logos is your claim, your reasons, and your evidence. All right? You want them to be valid, you want them to be solid, and you really want them to be the heart of your paper. Okay? You don't want to emotionally manipulate the reader by just using pathos or emotional appeals, but it may be very effective. If you look at the beginning of Ed Koch's essay on the death penalty, he tells you 2 stories that are intentionally designed to provoke the reader's anger, sense of injustice, so on and so forth. So your examples and what you include in your paper should be influenced by your desire to make a rhetorical appeal. Now, I want to point to another source that can be very helpful in this paper, and that is the claims and proofs handout that's under the writing guides. Now, that handout shows you several different types of claims. It categorizes 5 different types of claims. They are very commonly the type of claims that you will run into. Okay, and so I don't have to search for this. I'm going to use the search feature, and there's the claims and proofs handout. Now, what you'll find is at the very end, you'll find a chart that lists the most common 5 types of claims. Okay, and it tells you a lot of information about those different types of claims. It tells you what questions those types of claims answer, what kinds of proof or evidence is often used to support those types of claims, how articles or essays that contain those types of claims are typically organized. That doesn't mean all of them are, but it's just a typical list. And then, of course, it gives you some examples of those types of claims. Now, this can be very helpful, because if you can categorize the claim that you're making, then this chart may very well help you to figure out what types of evidence might be most effective for that type of claim, what organizational strategies might work best. So use this. And it's also a way of identifying the type of claim, of course, that the author is making in the essay you chose, because, of course, the first step is to understand that argument. Now, the types of proofs is just another word for evidence. This deals a lot, again, with the logos of your argument, the actual logic of it, the reasoning and the evidence. And this gives you several different pieces of evidence. You can see that there are logical appeals, there are emotional appeals, right, pathos, and there are motivational proofs, which are also emotional. They often will motivate the reader to do something. Okay, so you may find this handout very, very helpful while you're writing your essay. So take a look at it. I would even advise you to print it out. I think it can help you on both of the key components of the paper. All right, so let's see. The essay should be 5 to 6 pages long, so your progress draft should be a minimum of 5 full pages. Okay, you have to use at least 4 sources, and they should be academic in nature. 2 of them must be academic in nature. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just go use any web page for the other 2 sources. What it does mean is that you should probably get those 2 sources from the DSC Libraries database, and the other sources might come from, for instance, the online version of a reliable print source like U.S. News and World Report or the New York Times or the Washington Post, or maybe it'll come from a website like the whitehouse.gov site, whose information is generally reliable, especially in terms of statistics. You might get information, for instance, from the author of the essay that you're relying on for your argument's biography, if there might be any information that might be helpful for you in that. So you want to make sure that it is a reliable source. .edu, .gov. A lot of .com means commercial, which means that those sorts of sites are generally selling something. Sometimes it's an idea, sometimes it's a product, sometimes it's memberships and things like that. So be very careful about what the motive of that web page is. Do not use unreliable sources. That is the quickest way to ruin your credibility. Okay? Now, these are the grading criteria, and on the right here you can see that I have opened up the grading rubric. This should look familiar to you. It just has these criteria that are specifically for the My Turn essay. I'm going to be grading you based upon your understanding of the essay you're using to base your paper off of. I'm going to be grading you on the clarity and strength of your own argument. So are your appeals effective? Have you developed a solid ethos? Have you used logical reasoning? Have you used reliable sources? Have you organized the argument in a way that makes it easy for the reader to follow? Have you thought very conscientiously about how to phrase your thesis and how to say the things that you're saying and making your argument in a way that's appropriate for the audience? Okay, so those are the factors of clarity and strength of argument. And then there's credibility and the effectiveness of the supporting evidence. That's your research. Did you do good research, and did you find solid, valid sources? The essay and paragraph organization we've already talked about. Your source documentation, MLA style, a lot of you are not looking this information up, and you simply have to. When I do research, I still have to use my MLA handbook, okay? So it's not something you're going to memorize, and it's not something you can do just in any old way you please. You have got to look this up in your handbook, or you can look on the Purdue University's online writing lab, or OWL. A reliable source that tells you exactly how you're supposed to format the parenthetical citations. Those are the citations that go in the body of your paper. So any piece of information you get from a source, whether you directly quote it, whether you summarize it, or whether you paraphrase it, has to be followed by a parenthetical citation. You need to look up what MLA demands be in that parenthetical citation. It's different for every style. The works cited page, there's a sample works cited page on the content page as well. And you really, for my money, it's the easiest way to figure out how to format a works cited page. What you cannot do is not look it up. Okay? Many of you, more did it incorrectly than did it correctly. And that is the product simply of not looking it up. Because once you've looked it up, it should be very easy to follow. Okay? So, look up parenthetical citations. Make sure you're doing it correctly, using either your handbook or a reliable source. All right? Formatting is the same as always. I cannot stress it. The formatting is such a simple thing, and yet so many of you, I won't even say so many, a few of you, are still trying to play really immature games and trying to fool me into thinking that your text is longer. And not only is it an insult to my intelligence, but it lowers your grade because you, in the end, don't have the depth of coverage that I want. When I want 5 to 6 pages, it's not because I'm sitting there because I just have a number in mind. It's because it's the depth that I want you to cover the topic in. A 2-page paper, obviously, doesn't cover a topic nearly as in depth as a 5 to 6 page paper, and a 5 to 6 page paper not nearly as in depth as my dissertation did, which was over 200 pages. Okay. When I write articles for academic publications, I write 25 to 35 pages. So you can imagine what kind of depth I have to go into. And so the 5 to 6 pages is an indication of depth and development. All right. So quit trying to do really immature things like widen your header, move your margins in by, a centimeter, making the pictures bigger, because as soon as I open your paper, I take all the graphics out. I format the paper without all the extra space between paragraphs. I do all of that. And then whatever's there is what I grade you on. So stop wasting your time. Write 5 to 6 pages. That means 5 full pages at a minimum for your progress draft, okay? Stop using big font. All of you, or many of you, like to make your title really big. The title should be the same size font, not bolded, not underlined, as the rest of the paper. And then the due dates, of course, can be found on your assignment schedule. So I just wanted to walk through this with you so that you're really clear about what's being expected of you in this paper. You have 7 articles. You should have already chosen one. You should have already posted your choice on the discussion forum. And they vary in topics from Koch's is on the death penalty. Chesler's is on the failure of feminism and why feminism doesn't work anymore. There's a gun control essay. There's an essay on young people and their use of the internet. Let's see. There's Austin's essay is an essay about removing the F word from public discourse. Read these carefully, you guys, because some of these are really written tongue-in-cheek. And the signs for that are sort of subtle. Okay, like in Austin's essay, a lot of people will say that the claim is that the F word should be removed from public discourse, but you have to look a lot more carefully than that. Okay? Does she really mean that it should be removed from public discourse? If you look at her conclusion, if you look at some of her examples, the ones especially that seem crazy to you, right? Like $100 fines every time you say it in public. Those are indications that the writer may be writing satirically or sarcastically. Same thing goes for Ivan's taking a stab at our infatuation with guns. Look very carefully at the titles, you guys. And many of you commented on how Ivan's must be crazy for suggesting that we would get exercise if we use knives. So why would a publication like the Seattle Times, which is a very well-reputed newspaper, why would they publish an essay that made a claim that was stupid or was obviously ridiculous? And so the next thing you should be thinking is she being sarcastic? Is she being satirical? So you really do, that's the part of the assignment, the understanding the argument. That is vital. It's the first step. You've got to do that first. Okay? I encourage you to email each other, especially people who are doing the same essay as you. I encourage you to use the open forum. I encourage you to use the essay choice forum where you had to post your choice. That's precisely why I made you do that. I have no problem with you guys discussing the essays amongst yourselves. You cannot plagiarize from another writer, obviously, but if you're unclear about the claim and reasons and evidence of an article, then talk to the people that are reading the same article as you. Or here's a revolutionary idea, call Miss T, and I'll be happy to talk you through it. Email and text, not really the appropriate forum to have a discussion like that. And I don't know if any of you know this. I know one of you does because I've seen you in my office. I have office hours. I am in my office for 9.5 hours on Tuesdays, and I'm on the New Smyrna campus on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I have office hours so that you can come talk to me. At the very least, you may want to call me. I would strongly suggest it. Okay? So if you're confused about the argument, then get some clarification. However you have to do that. Go to the Writing Center. Go to the Academic Support Center. Call me. Talk to your classmates. Okay? What you don't want to do in this paper is go try to find somebody who has made the argument that you want to make and simply paraphrase another person's argument. You want to build this argument on your own. You want it to be based in something that you have conviction about. You want it to be based in something that you actually believe. Okay, so this is not simply an exercise in putting words on paper, but in really formulating your own argument about a topic that you feel strongly about. Stop trying to take the easy way out, and really think critically about your topic. Do the research. Move through each step of the thinking and writing process for this paper, and the results will show it, and so will your grade. Okay, that's the best advice I can give you. All right, stop believing that everybody else has a better opinion or knows more than you do. Formulate your own thoughts. Compose your own argument. Put it together piece by piece. Look for original research. Do all of those things, and you'll get not only a much more satisfying writing experience, but you'll get a higher grade. The former, to me, is much more rewarding.